All right, guys, so today we want to start chapter 9, which is the muscular system. And for exam 3, it's going to cover, if you look at the syllabus, chapter 6, which is done, chapter 8, which is also done, and chapter 9. Okay, so chapter 9 probably has the most information in it. It has probably the most physiology in it. And so it's a pretty big chapter. And so this is definitely a chapter that I'm going to break down into smaller 15-minute videos. Okay, so let's begin. So when we're talking about the muscular system, we want to remind ourselves that there's 3 different types of muscle. We learned this already, but just as a reminder, we've got skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. And so in this chapter, most of the information I give you, we're going to be referring to skeletal muscle. Okay, but there are a few slides later on in the chapter that are devoted to cardiac muscle, and at the very end of the chapter you'll see that we go over information that's relevant to smooth muscle. Okay, but again, the bulk of the chapter is devoted to skeletal muscle, and so you want to keep that in mind as we're going through anatomical structure and physiology. Most of this relates specifically to skeletal muscle, right? And then just a reminder about the histology, what the muscle looks like underneath the microscope. Remember, with skeletal muscle, we're going to have striations. Cardiac muscle, we're going to have striations with intercalated discs. And then smooth muscle, there's no striations, no intercalated discs. With skeletal muscle, we're going to have cells that are long and cylindrical with lots of nuclei. In the cardiac muscle, we're going to have branching. And then in the smooth muscle, you really just have these cells that are flat, almost like a flat football. Okay? All right, so when it comes to muscles, we need to review the function of muscles. So the first function is movement. So skeletal muscles can move the body by moving bones. We know that you can't directly control bones, but you can directly control your skeletal muscle. When you contract your skeletal muscle, that pulls on tendons, which are attached to bones, and that's how you move your body. In the heart, cardiac muscle contracts to help move blood through the heart and ultimately through the cardiovascular system. We know that smooth muscle, as an example, lines most of the digestive system, and when that smooth muscle contracts, it helps to move food through the gut towards your anus. Muscle can also help maintain posture. So certain skeletal muscles contract continuously to maintain posture. You see that when people are standing upright. It also happens when people are sitting in a chair. You have certain lower back muscles that are contracting to help hold you upright in a chair. That's why if you've ever sat in a chair for hours, your back can start to hurt. We also have joint stabilization. So muscle tone helps stabilize joints by keeping tension on muscle tendons that cross over joints. So we see this a lot in the knees, for example. You have tendons that actually cross over those joints, and then when the muscles contract, it puts tension on those tendons, but that actually provides stability to those joints. And then we've got heat generation. So muscles can actually contract repeatedly. We call that shivering. And when you shiver, you are actually generating heat. So those are 4 basic functions of muscles in the muscular system. All right, guys, so there are also 4 different special functions of muscles. And some of these we talk about a lot in this chapter, others not so much. So the first special function is contractility. So here muscle cells shorten and generate a strong pulling force as they contract. Now we do spend a lot of time in this chapter discussing the physiology of contractility. So you may want to put a star beside this particular function because this one's going to be important. The second function is excitability. Here, nerve signals can excite muscles and cause contraction. Again, this is another one of those special functions we're going to talk a lot about. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about the physiology of excitability. Okay, so you want to put a star beside that one as well. There's also extensibility. This special function we really do not talk about in this class at all. We will mention it on a future slide, but we don't go into the physiology of extensibility, which is occurs when muscle tissue can be stretched by the contraction of an opposing muscle. Okay, and then the fourth special function, again, we mention on one slide, but we don't discuss the physiology very much at all, is elasticity, where muscle tissue can recoil passively and resume its resting length. Okay, so those are the four special functions. Okay, so in this particular slide, we just have a couple of definitions that we need to be aware of. So the first definition is origin, and that's the attachment of a muscle on a less movable bone. And the second definition is insertion. That's attachment of the muscle on the more movable bone. And this makes more sense when you actually look at a particular example. So if you come over here to the picture, if you look at this muscle here, brachialis, and muscles you won't learn for a couple of weeks in lab, but brachialis is one of those muscles that you will learn. And the brachialis muscle here is actually attached to the humerus bone. So this is the humerus. And the other end of the brachialis is attached to the ulna, which is this bone right here. Okay. And when we consider how this muscle moves, you see this upward hinge movement, like what the arrow is trying to indicate right there, okay? So if you consider that movement of basically bending your elbow, then you want to ask yourself, well, which bone is moving more in this natural movement? Is it the humerus moving more, or is the ulna moving more? And I think that hopefully it's obvious that as you're bending your arm, the ulna is moving more. So since the ulna has the greater amount of movement here, then where the brachialis, this muscle, attaches to the ulna, this area is considered the insertion because it's the attachment of the muscle on the more movable bone. And that makes this other end of the brachialis the origin, which is the attachment of the muscle on the less movable bone. So each muscle has its own origin and insertion. And if you went to medical school, you learn all the origin and insertions for all these different muscles. You don't have to learn all the different origin and insertions for all of the different muscles, but you do need to know the definition of the origin and the definition of insertion. That I expect you to know for exam 3. The other two definitions over here are tendon and aponeurosis. And tendon we've heard of, so this is connective tissue that attaches muscle to bone. And really, what's specific here is what it looks like. It's cord-like in appearance. Okay, so this is dense, regular connective tissue that has a very cord-like appearance. And if you come over here to this image of a tendon, I think it's pretty obvious. Yeah, it kind of looks like a cord, okay? We also need to know what an aponeurosis is. So an aponeurosis is connective tissue that attaches muscle to bone also. So it has the same function as a tendon, but what's different is its anatomical appearance. It's not shaped like a cord. It has the appearance of a sheet, like think of a bed sheet. Okay, so that's what anatomically it looks like. And there is actually an aponeurosis in the hand. So this is meant to represent a hand, okay? And then can you see here in the palm of the hand, there's this webbing, white stuff. That is the aponeurosis, okay? So both tendons and an aponeurosis attach muscle to bone. Tendons have a cord-like appearance. An aponeurosis is shaped more like a sheet, so it's just very flat. Okay, again, very straightforward. It's not complicated. You just stick it on a note card and memorize it. Okay. All right, so here we have a muscle terminology slide. So within the muscular system, some of the terms that we learned in previous chapters have been changed when we get to the muscular system. So for example, skeletal and smooth muscle cells are called fibers moving forward. So when you see the term fibers in the muscular system, you need to think cells. Okay, they don't call them cells, they call them fibers. And that can be a little confusing because we just came out of, connective tissue not too long ago. And remember in connective tissue, there were collagen fibers, elastic fibers, reticular fibers. Well, now moving into chapter 9, we have this word fibers again, but fibers are actually what they call cells. So you want to be mindful of that when you're looking at pictures and they're referring to fibers, those are the cells. Okay, and supposedly they did that because the cells of the muscular system, skeletal and smooth muscle, are elongated. Okay, we are also going to see these things called myofilaments. So these are specific types of microfilaments that are responsible for the shortening of muscle cells. So specifically, we're going to be looking at two proteins, actin and myosin, that are going to make up these myofilaments, and they are going to be found in these structures called myofibrils. There's a lot of new terms here, but all of these terms we're going to address in the coming slides, okay? The plasma membrane is no longer called the plasma membrane. Now they're going to call it the sarcolemma. So when you see that term sarcolemma on any of the figures in this chapter, you need to think plasma membrane. The cytoplasm is now going to be referred to as the sarcoplasm. So again, when you see that term sarcoplasm, you just need to know that that's the cytoplasm. Nothing terribly special there. And then you're going to see this structure called the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which is basically just this really elaborate, smooth endoplasmic reticulum. But this sarcoplasmic reticulum is going to be really important for muscle contraction, and we're going to see it a lot moving forward. Okay, so a lot of new terms, but we've got a little muscle terminology slide here that you can kind of keep coming back to get a definition if you need to. All right.